over to you guys, and I'll pop back in. And it's so nice to see. Hi, Anna. We have Ana Campaverde here, Dr. Escobar. So thank you so much for coming. And I leave it to the fine Archives and Special Collections crew.
Right.
All right.
Thanks so much, Professor DeLuca, Lisa.
Thank
It's really
you.
great to be here. And what I will do is I will pop up my screen here, since I'm going first. But let me just say, Lisa, thank you so much for the invitation to present. But also, I'm really honored and pleased to be with my colleagues here, Sarah and Jean. So we're looking forward to a really excellent presentation from our participants. And also, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I may not look at it right away because I'm kind of focused on the PowerPoint, but we can answer them at the end. And also, after me will be Jean and then Sarah. So I'm looking forward to this experience. So, okay, can everybody see the PowerPoint? Great, thanks everybody.
Yep.
So I gave the acknowledgements, but again, I can't thank everybody enough for being here today and my co-presenters. So what I'm going to do is feature some of our materials here in the archives that are more, as they say, old school in terms of its production and in terms of doing a historical record of data, especially from a Seton Hall perspective, but also an even further narrow but no less important viewpoint, the Latino community at Seton Hall. And I also want to thank Anna Campaverde because she's been a tremendous colleague over the years, working with her in terms of the Latino Institute. So without any further ado, let me get into some of the details that we're going to look at. And I will apologize in advance. A few of my slides are text heavy, but since this is being recorded, I figure you have the text if you wish to look at it in the future, but also recommend your friends to the recording as well if you can. Thank you. But I also preface a lot of things in terms of research activity, in terms of we don't have everything. Having the ability to collect, preserve, and make available different resources, it all depends on circumstance. It depends on originating departments, individuals, and so forth. The efforts of the archivist are really important in this case, but also equally important and working with the community in terms of doing a lot of outreach, a lot of advocacy in terms of the need for materials and so forth. Working with Sarah and Jean, they have the same perspective in terms of the value of what we do collect and how it can benefit our research community to the best of its content and its potential for building knowledge along the way. Okay, so basically the preface is, the main thing is you have to keep in mind that our formal department was founded in 1994, and we've also had a few fires along the way, unfortunately. But this was common among a lot of Catholic institutions of higher education in the 19th century, early 20th. So it's one of those things in terms of what records were lost, what were saved, and we're very thankful for those that have been saved. And I'm very happy to present some of the items that have been rescued and conserved over time. So let's get into the heart of the presentation. Historical evolution. And basically, I'm working on student-based information. I don't want to give you, so to speak, information overload. So I'm going to try to make my presentation a lot more linear in terms of focusing on the university and what we have here in the archives, especially from, as I say, a traditional sense, all the way up to more complex and more detailed information sets. Okay, so the earliest ones, as you can maybe predict, is that they're mainly textual based and very basic in terms of statistical information to highlight and complement the written word, so to speak, the quill and the parchment, as I call it. And this sort of ties into the quill and parchment. Basically, we have a number of historical registers. Now, these were the computers, the laptops of the 19th century. And bonus points, if anybody can read 19th century cursive, I believe they're not teaching it in schools anymore, but this is something to keep in mind when you're looking at records, especially handwritten ones that haven't been translated in some ways. We're very thankful for the individual, the priest who was doing the records here, because they're very ornate, but they're also legible in that. But I'm not criticizing anybody who's tried to make the effort over the time that they did the input, because basically we do have the information. It might take a little time to decipher, but we have it there. It's available, and we go with it. Okay, so I just want to point out attendance registers. We have financial registers, and even, interestingly enough, punishment registers, which are interesting. Some things that I found in there were interesting. Individual might have to do extra walks around the campus. They might have to do extra chores and things of that nature, just for minor offenses. But with that said, this gives more detail to the whole story of the Seton Hall student. And these things are invaluable because in many cases, they're the only things we have from the 19th century, along with catalogs or bulletins to complement and then document the 19th century student. And this gives you an illustration of what one of the registers looks like. And it shows our very first 6 students here that were enrolled on September 1st, 1856. Now, I mentioned college catalogs or bulletins, another incredible and very important research tool. Our earliest one is from 1861, 62 academic year. Unfortunately, we don't have any from the 1850s when we were in Madison. But from this catalog onward, you get a really great detailed sense of how the school was at its earliest ebb, but working its way up in terms of prestige, but also in terms of defining itself as the Catholic College of New Jersey at that time, later Catholic University. And you get a sense here of the course of studies, very liberal arts, classical based, with also like a look at the future in terms of other non-traditional liberal arts courses such as mathematics and sciences that were found on other pages. I'm trying to give you like sort of a starter, and then hopefully individuals will make appointments or do research requests down the road for more information. That's always the wish and hope. But with that said, course of studies, the terms, I always get an interesting response when I talk about the tuition and fees about the Seton Hall student of the 19th century. As you can sort of see here, board and tuition, washing, mending, and use of bed and bedding for those resident students, which there were few in those days. Most students commuted, so to speak, $225 per year. But you have to keep in mind inflationary rates that came later, and 225 was a very high figure for the 19th century. So in terms of financial calculation, you can always put it in $21. And then, of course, the catalog of students, also invaluable in terms of they printed these out in most of the catalogs dating from 1861 to 1949. You should see how thin the catalogs are in physical form, from very thin to the 1861 one to very thick in terms of 1949, which was the last year they printed the catalog of students. With that said, it gives the name and the geographical destination. So we have basic information and data here, which really helps the researcher get a sense of how the school was evolving at that time and how it would grow even more so as we reach the 20th century. And speaking of the 20th century, more statistical, expository, and photographic data, which helps identify the student and who they are in more detail outside of, as they say in the military, name, rank, serial number, so to speak. Campus publications, the yearbook or the annual newspaper, and numerical information. I'll show you some specific examples right now. Okay, our famous go-tos, along with the catalogs and registers, are our school newspaper, the Setonia. This is actually the cover of the very first one. The newspapers were tremendous in terms of giving a sense of campus news from a student's perspective from its very start back in 1924 and going forward. And you get information, especially from student activities, and you have a lot of details that would tie into maybe accomplishments, not only in athletics, but also in terms of academics, student body elections, and so forth over the years. And also the yearbook, the white and blue, and later the galleon. I'll talk more about this in a few moments, but suffice to say, this year was very important in Seton Hall's annals in terms of documenting and having these information sources available for future generations that would carry on through time, and that they're invaluable to the archival community here on campus, but also to researchers near and far. We get a lot of alumni requests and also current students as well. So praise to the individuals who were editors, writers, and who preserve these materials over time. Okay, statistical surveys. Now, these are great, and these were a tremendous find. We've used them over the years in terms of different research requests that have come in, but we haven't used them extensively because a lot of the questions are more textual based. But with that said, it's my pleasure to show you some of the things we do have in our collection, which can be utilized even more depending upon the circumstance and depending upon what might be out there in terms of different projects that come up in relation to Seton Hall's history as we move forward. And we're looking at our 175th anniversary in a few years. So things of that nature, but even beforehand, we're happy to help out in terms of not only text, but also statistical survey numbers. I'm not going to try to say that 3 times fast. But anyway, here we go. Record keeping is important. And you should note that 1897, 98 is when we had our first run-in with like standardization. Catholic schools of the 19th century were more independent-minded, and they were really going towards the education of the individual student in terms of a Catholic-based education, heavy on theology, philosophy, Latin, the classics, English language, and so forth. But with that said, Seton Hall wanted to not only keep its Catholic identity and be more diverse, even from the beginning, because they had an open enrollment policy. It all depended on good character. I'll talk about that more in a moment. But in terms of satisfying accreditation agencies, because there's a lot of colleges and universities during the 19th century, especially Catholic affiliated ones, that went defunct because they weren't following a prescribed rule, especially in terms of professional recommendations or expectations from their college education. This was especially true in the medical field, education, the law field, and so forth. But with that all said, Seton Hall was cognizant of this, and they adapted themselves nicely in terms of documentation. And these are just a few examples. There was the Catholic Educational Association, which streamlined its reporting structure. And you can see here various examples. Some of the standards from the 1920s and basic information in terms of the institution, number of students, where they're connected in terms of state boards, and various other information, freshmen and special students as well. And then we get into different other things, such as departmental information, number of courses, the AB, which is the Bachelor of Arts, BS is Bachelor of Science. Those were the 2 major degrees for a number of years until we expanded further in the 20th century. So you get a sense here of how it all connected, and it was all handwritten, or typewritten, depending upon the circumstance and what was available in terms of making this reporting information available to the accrediting agency. Excuse me. Okay. And this is just some more information. Another reporting board was the American Council of Education, the AUAC at that time, and information from the 1930s, basically information about the graduates, enrollment, summer sessions even, college types, and so forth. And you go down here to the history, the calendar, and so forth, and we just go forward in terms of what was going on. Okay, American colleges and universities. You can see here in terms of matriculation, graduation, and so forth, along with departments and so forth. So this particular report was 5 pages, and you can see how the fees differed in terms of various things that were going on in terms of offerings. As the curriculum expanded, so too did the options, but also in terms of financials, they had to cover their information, because all along the way, Seton Hall was a small school with a small enrollment. Usually it averaged around, say, 100 to 300, depending upon the year and circumstance. And it was especially tough during the Great Depression era of the 1930s. So with all that said, they had to modify and adapt as they went along. And this is an interesting document I found from 1931. as you can see here, one of the things they were worried or cognizant of is basically where their students were coming from. Catholic institutions, the parochial school education experience, or public schools, or even public and Catholic schools. So things of this nature, freshmen, upperclassmen, and so forth. This was the sum total of this document. But at the same time, again, it was an open enrollment policy. Even though the school was predominantly Caucasian at that time, there were a lot of examples of international students coming in from different places, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a moment. And the type of school they came from made no difference, but they just wanted to have this as a reporting status or structure or data for their own files, and also to help in terms of working with the Archdiocese. Well, the Archdiocese came in 1937, but in 31 it was the Diocese of Newark, because they were the actual sponsor and creator of Seton Hall College back in 1856. So reporting structures were interesting, and the data that was available was what they did in terms of highlighting their accomplishments and how they were moving forward along the way. And this is basically a summation. For a number of years, it was like very basic in terms of numerics, in terms of how many students were there. You can see here the very first one they did, 79 students. What happened was that they only counted the number of students in the high school, the college, and the seminary. And actually, you have to keep in mind, too, the history where Seton Hall students, it was a 7-year curriculum going from 1856 until about 1897, with some modifications going into the 20th century, grandparenting individuals into both high school and college, and changing up information by those different divisions. So it's like the structure you see here today. For those of you who don't know, Seton Hall Prep was still on campus after it was split from the 1890s up until 1985, when they moved to West Orange. But with that said, its history is very strong, and very strong connected to the college overall. And then you should also keep in mind that seminarians were here from the beginning too, from the 1860s. There was a slight move during the 1920s to a place called Darlington near Mahwah up in northern New Jersey, until they moved back to campus in the 1980s. And I just did a blog post, which is interesting to look at in terms of what was called the Bailey Grammar School. There was a grammar school on campus that was established for grades 1 through 8 from 1901 to the late 1920s. And that's another statistical information piece as well that, to consider in terms of those who are doing a lot of research in terms of their family and who may have attended Seton Hall at that grade level. I know I'm rambling here, but suffice to say, there's all these variations as we go along. There's so much to add and so much to talk about. But I just wanted to give you a sense of how the statistics were basic, important, but that grew over time. And here's another preface too. You can see here in terms of what they wrote in the notes, in terms of figures aren't here, no catalogs existed. And I mentioned the school fire of 1909, and you can see here that it was lost, the statistics from that particular time period. So it's good when they have the information, the marginalia, so to speak, in terms of explaining if there isn't any information or what types you're looking at. And some is just self-explanatory, like this as well. This is a document from 1949. Social Studies Department. It has a comparative look at faculty, and then you have the number of students that are enrolled in social studies. And you can see here at the bottom, college placed on the approved list of the Middle States Association. That's our present day accrediting agency, if you're not familiar. And you can see 1932. The early 30s was really big when Seton Hall was really in tune and in sync with the MSA, or the Middle States Association. And this is just some of the information from the Office of the Registrar at that time from Seton Hall College. And I'll mention in a moment, we did become a university later in 1950. Okay. Now some more information data sets. Going back to the school catalog bulletin, you remember the 1861 catalog where it was very basic. You had these prices for different items, and admissions was open if you had a good character and so forth. And I'll show you a page of that in a moment. But you can see how things have grown here. Requirements for undergraduate information, academic regulations, application procedures, tuition and fees are line itemed here, policy on payment, and then faculty advice and grading scales. Of course, grading, I should point out this too. Grades are personal information and they're kept with the registrar and they're confidential with very good reason. A lot of times, if you're doing, say, family history or an added research effort, family members only, under the registrar's rules, the Office of the Registrar, can you see those records. But I should point out too, here in the archives, we do have records from various sources, such as commencement programs, which are public information. So with that said, however we can help with data going from individual like names to what they had to face or experience, very important in terms of fleshing out the story in more detail. Okay, advanced data sets. Okay, earlier methodology, building on this and moving forward. Now, the important one is equal gender representation, and I have a couple examples here. 1968 is when full coeducation came to the South Orange campus. As you can see here, what they did is they expanded from just the number of students, which before this time was all male, to men and women, full-time, part-time, total, and so forth by schools, and then overall. And then you get into registration figures and so forth. These are just two of many pages, and the ones I showed you from the 20s, 30s, and 40s, same thing. There's a lot of bulk there, just cumulatively. But in terms of like how it grew over time, the numbers and the pages grew as we find the information that has stood the test of time and that we have available for the research community. Okay, as you can see here, again, more on gender issues in terms of different places. We even had our Patterson campus operational until the early 1970s. Then you have law school and other types of grand total university figures. We had a medical school in the 1950s, early 60s, and then the urban division as well. But I'll talk a little bit about the urban division in a moment. And then, of course, the following states. And you can see here Puerto Rico with one, the Virgin Islands with one. So at that time, we were still having international students and representation coming to the campus here in South Orange. Now we get into precision data sets. Okay, this is where it really came to the fore in terms of modern reporting of different types of information. And I'll show you a few examples here. I was talking to my colleagues Sarah and Jean earlier about how I love these earlier graphics, and they tell the story. I mean, they have the key here, and what they did was they looked at mostly undergraduate majors and ancillary or related fields in terms of how students were using the campus, full-time in New Jersey and the United States in terms of alumni geographical distribution, for example, among others that are in the first fact book that we have, which is actually available online if you go to the Office of Facts and Figures. Actually, I have some links in my presentation later if you want to check that out, if you can't find it on your own. With that said, here's another compilation too, just like the ones from the early days from 1861 until like 1954 is when they just had the straight numbers. Here's more information from the period from 73 up until 87, 88. Straightforward, fall semester and so forth, undergraduate, graduate. And then you have your graph here, which shows the enrollment, how it went up, went down, went sky high, and then sort of went down and then levels off. And you can tell a lot, not only by the text, but by the graphics as well. And then we go about 10 years later, and this just shows you another thing. And then we get to this point. This is the first example that I found by a racial background in terms of how the breakdown was made. And as you can see here, the statistics are very clear in terms of this pie chart. And then you have the graphic numbers down here. And you can see how it all hangs out. I'm just going by the nomenclature or the terminology. Hispanic 8%, Puerto Rican 3% of the time period. So we go from there in terms of full-time freshmen and then undergraduate enrollment, as you can see there on the right-hand side. Okay, and this is our last example. This is from 2019, and you can see how more sophisticated it is. but no less important than the other materials I showed you. The 5-year fall enrollment trends, for example. Again, just one example among many pages in this document, this report. And how it's broken down, again, race and ethnicity, undergraduates by gender, by age even, and then we go into residency and all these other wonderful facts and how it all ties together in terms of community and documenting it. So you have all that there to work from in terms of the statistical data sets that'll help you in terms of seeing how Seton Hall grew over time and how it was documented. And here on the right-hand side is that page I was talking about. I should say Office of Institutional Research. And the URL is up here. But it's easy to find through the search engine on the homepage. Happy to help out if anybody needs any assistance too. Okay. Sorry for shouting out context. This is something that I'm really keen on. Some people aren't, but that's okay too. The way I look at it, you have the individual story, the individual research project. A lot of times I ask questions, and I've learned a lot from wonderful archivists in the field, different colleagues, different mentors, and so forth. If you want to build upon your research project, the more data, the better, and in different forms. Context is important. For example, a student from Puerto Rico comes to a Seton Hall. Why did they come here? Was there something going on in their home town in terms of the island? Did they want to study something in particular? Did they see something in say in a magazine that inspired them to study science at Seton Hall? Did they have relatives in the area? You kind of get the drift. There's a lot of questions and a lot of context that can be added to really make the story more, intense in a very, very positive way. So this is really important to keep in mind, just going beyond the numbers alone, which are invaluable, but bringing the text and also the background to it is really, really tremendous if you can do it. I take a genealogical approach, as you can see here, but I'll tell you a little bit more in that detail. Okay. And I will apologize too if this all sounds like a commercial message, but really working with the research community is important, and what they need is really key to what we do here, especially in terms of offering reference the best we can, thorough and as detailed as possible. So I say Seton Hall History 101, this is where context comes in terms of what the student experienced, especially those from the Latino community, the ones who were coming here from different lands. But also, I'll talk a little bit more about the stages of how the Latino experience really enriched the campus over time. Okay, brief timeline, but you can go into more detail as you go. And I know this is being recorded, so I'll just go over this briefly. The move from Madison to South Orange. I mentioned the 7-year curriculum shift, different schools. Post-World War II was huge in terms of enrollment explosion. It went from 94, I went to a 94% increase over from 1945 to 46, and then 47 was even greater, so amazing. University status, centennial, coeducation, and then the modern age, which is being celebrated today. And these are just a few other things. As you bring down your school history needs, you can always go in terms of time periods, different facets, student life, administration, alumni, and so forth. And these are just a few things from the earliest Latino experience that they encountered. 57, the first commencement, how the move shook out, our first AB degree. Commencement came after the founding, and various other factors such as alumni, again, the 7-year curriculum. I can't stress that enough. And then, of course, the library. We have to talk about the library. 1898 was our first formal one. Marshall Hall, which is adjacent to President's Hall, which used to be the seminary. You can see the remnants of the library still there. If you look on the outside in terms of the frieze along the windows, you'll see icons of books and symbolic of knowledge and learning. But anyway, all these tell a story, and this is just one example for the 19th century. Okay, the mission statement. As with any institution, it helps if you have note of it and know more about it. It's not necessary, but at the same time, I will say this was the original entrance requirement. Seton Hall had a lot of Catholic schools of the age of the 19th century. had open enrollment policies, and actually a lot in terms of the religious aspect. A lot of Catholic schools hosted Protestant students, those who were Jewish or of other faiths. Um, it was important because what they wanted to do is give an educational opportunity to anybody who really wanted to learn. And most of it was going by the health, manners, and morals of the pupils or individuals who were there. And what they did too is they didn't force the religion on those who were non-Catholic. In many cases, and Seton Hall was no exception, was basically having a another requirement. They didn't have to study theology. They could go to the church of their choice and find another type of class structure. So that's something that I learned through general Catholic education context, but also in terms of the context of Setonia as it stood and as it stands now today. Okay, another interesting page, again, the expenses and then the discipline, which is kind of funny, looking at it through 21st century eyes, in terms of the rules. No student leaves the college grounds without permission. Use of tobacco is forbidden. No books other than textbooks and works of reference. Receive newspapers. Correspondence is subject to supervision. So it's interesting. In a lot of ways, too, with social media and sharing, too, a lot of things haven't changed. But at the same time, at that time period, you get a sense of how life was structured, especially for the college student, but also in terms of society in general. Context, very interesting. And of course, the women of Setonia are very important in the urban division. Okay, I mentioned this earlier a little bit, but I want to give you some more detail. This was key and very important because we established two different schools, or campuses, I should say, one in Newark and one in Jersey City initially, and later Patterson, which I mentioned briefly. 37 is when we had the enrollment of women on campus. And although it was considered an extension division or an urban division, and they didn't allow women on the South Orange campus, except for specialized classes and also the first summer school that was offered in 1937. They could take classes here, here in the village. But with that said, you can see all male college, gender equality, they were working towards that. And the types of students, basically, it was more formalized in the 19th century, proper credentials, transcripts, high school, and so forth, looking for a specific degree, teachers. The majors were mainly education, English, and some nursing. 1940 is when the nursing school really took off in terms of enrollments and also sustaining itself to the present day level of excellence that they receive and encounter. Okay, and you can see here for advancement, if they just wanted to take courses for personal growth. And then you can see here, courses and extension divisions open to both men and women. That's right from the catalog, as are likewise the courses during the summer, which I just mentioned. So it's a great picture here of Priest welcoming the first summer school students. Okay, now I mentioned the post-World War II boom. A lot of factors. The main one is that the GI Bill of Rights, the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, granted free education to any veteran from the Army, Navy, Marines, Army Air Corps, Coast Guard, Merchant Marine, you have it. If they served in the military during the war, they were allowed to attend free of charge. And a lot of ex-service men and women, encountered this and they took advantage of it. This was the boom also, context, in terms of how white-collar professions, especially in business, education, medical, law, and so forth. This was really catching on in terms of a career path for a lot of students who really didn't even think about a college education prior to World War II, during the Great Depression era when money was tight, tough to find, and not available, readily available in most cases. I'm generalizing here, but suffice to say, case-by-case instances, along with context, case-by-case instances. And with that said, post-World War II is really important, as you can see here, and being in the, as I call it, the Newark metropolitan area, including New York City, they had these opportunities that were tremendous. The growth of suburbia, communities around New Jersey, and so forth. You kind of get the gist of it, but this was a very important time in the history of Seton Hall, and this is where we really had a boom in terms of further Latino attendance and participation and enrichment of the campus. Okay, I just point out a few other slides which really speak to the Latino experience and the importance of development on campus. Linguistics is very important. You have to keep in mind too, English and Spanish. What was the first language? And did individuals learn a particular vernacular if they were from, say they were from Chile, if they learned English at home or here at school. There were courses offered in Spanish language all along the way from the 19th century up until the present. But there's also clubs to really promote and talk further about the details, the importance, the value, which was there in terms of the Latino experience from different perspectives. And you can see here in terms of the different clubs, forgive me if I don't pronounce it right, Adelante and Esperia. So these are two excellent and well-regarded organizations that were really active in the late 40s through the 1950s, and then went further in terms of the 1960s forward. I think Adelante is still in operation, but the other ones, even from a historical perspective, important in terms of the groundwork they laid for future generations to explore. Interracial Council, very important, and we're in the middle of the DEI initiative, which is important. And all along the way, if different organizations started, but then maybe folded or went into another dimension or a different type of committee name, this provided a continuum. It's always good to see if you like to go this route is look at the origins of something and then how it progressed over time. That gives you the full story and full context of what you're looking for. Interracial Council was really key. You can see the impressive and the very touching motto or imprimatur they had on the group here in terms of the oneness of mankind and the dignity of the individual, irrespective of race. So you get a sense there. That's right from the council itself and their words. So just sharing with you what their mission and organization was all about. And there was heavy Latino participation, especially during its zenith years from 1950s into the early 60s. And full co-education on campus. This is where we really have things that come together in terms of melding the student body together and having just one cohesive campus in different ways. It took a while to happen, but this was a very key date in terms of Seton Hall's history, and we just celebrated 50 years a couple of academic semesters ago. Okay, and sorry for the text heavy on this. Talking about context and about different things, these are just a very few examples, just from my own perspective, but speaking to others who are really tremendous in terms of what they know about Latino history. Why they came to Seton Hall and how New Jersey's Latino population and contributions to the state and society were incredible, but also persisted. And why did it happen this way? Potentially. Again, case-by-case instance, but some of the things that were found were basically social, economic, political shifts. You have to keep in mind different wars. The Mexican-American War, even though it happened in 1845, this taught a little bit in terms of U.S. history, in terms of individuals from Mexico coming to be educated in the U.S., and even the Mexican higher education system. Community colleges, grand universities were founded, and then some came to the U.S. and went to Seton Hall. So we're thankful for that, but there's different variations again. The American Civil War, World War I, the Great War, and so forth, and even the Mexican revolutions of 1910, I believe, 1916, but I'll have to look that up about the year. So, and immigration limitations during the 1920s, xenophobia, unfortunately, limited different groups to the country. And I should point out that history isn't always nice or kind or pretty. So these things are just the fact of life and part of the report that individuals come to and what they learn and how they bring their own perspective from the modern day into whatever they're researching and whatever their findings come out to be. But moving forward to college participation, again, the Mexican War, Puerto Rico became an unincorporated territory at first, and then they had the option of becoming U.S. citizens. So we have a heavy influx from Puerto Rico, which is tremendous. And also they had the option, again, of coming to the U.S. and being educated. So Seton Hall being near New York, within a very heavily populated area of, and growing area of Latinos in northern New Jersey. As you can see here, different numbers. This is more modern, but at the same time, there was different influxes that came, especially during the early 20th century forward. Even Hudson County was named the Havana on the Hudson, in affectionate and impressive terms because of the number of Cubans who came to the area and so forth. You can see maybe why they came here too. After their college education, doing different things in terms of industry, commercial, and so forth. And also, very important to cite your information too. That's my commercial message as well. So bibliographies and then citing where it came from is important. Now I'm looking at my clock here, and I have about 15 minutes. So I'm going to go a little bit more quicker here. So thanks for bearing with me. Okay, international from the start. Mr. Ernesto Regal Madeira was our 20th student overall and our first Latino student. He was from the Yucatan. So we praise him for setting the trend and moving forward. And these are just a few other important individuals in Seton Hall's history who came from Latino-based territories and areas. I have to provide really great props and credit and appreciation to Alexandra Gomer, who was one of our student workers and interns, 2017. I'm very proud to mention she's at NYU now studying in archives. She was not an archives or history major beforehand, so she really dug this project, and it's been beneficial to our research efforts. So different individuals from 1850 to 1862, and I would put more in, but I know we're on a limited time scale here. Latino-centered regions, as you can see here, a number of territories and so forth. I do want to point out, a few things. Names have changed. Mompos, maybe. I have to do more research myself. Always in research mode, always in learning mode. And you can see here, Puerto Rico. It was spelled a different way back in the 19th century, early 20th century, until it became Puerto. And I should point out too, over the years, Latinos who were first, second, and third generation plus from the various areas, of course, New Jersey. And you have to keep in mind Brooklyn, important area of New York City, was independent once upon a time, an independent city that was thriving and had its incredible identity up until, I believe, 1899, but I have to check that as well. New York City and even Louisiana and Texas, which were host to a number of Mexican students over the years. And of course, other ethnicities came here as well over time. So it was part of the grand plan of Seton Hall to have diversity and inclusion, even from the earliest days of the school. And the first graduate from Latin America, and this is an interesting thing too that has me wondering. I count in terms of Latino experience, not only those who may be of Latino blood background, but also maybe individuals who may not have Latino origins who lived in those particular areas. So I've included them in terms of the wider scope. 1877, Alfred Horn. That name doesn't ring a bell in terms of Latino ethnicity. And I should point out that Miss Gomer, Alexandra, did a lot of research in terms of where family names originate from. That's not always the end all be all work that you can point to, but it gives a sense of how individuals came about and how they connect to the Latino experience or not, and also keeping in mind the mother's side too and their DNA and their background. Okay. And also Cuban influx. This is another contextual thing. There were a number of students who really came in around 1917 when World War I was going on, the Great War. And then, as you can see here, ancestry in terms of students, scholars, and so forth, but it really exploded, especially in terms of the first, second, third generation after World War II. And these are just a few more data sets. Post-World War II yearbooks, very key in terms of denoting the origins. I mentioned trying to see the etymology of surnames, which is helpful, but not always precisely accurate. But then you have a number of other things, such as you can see facial recognition and different things about where they came from. Robert Ramos is from Bogota. I believe that's how you pronounce it in New Jersey, not Bogota, as in Colombia. And Mr. Manuel Hidalgo, who is from Puerto Rico. And then another key is the alumni directories, which are helpful. Only from 1952 to the early 2000s in print form, but using this with a grain of salt, but also with care, because a lot of times there were addresses and phone numbers in there. And, this is something you have to keep in mind, the confidentiality factors. But the invaluable part was knowing when they graduated, what professions they are, and so forth in terms of networking potentials. And Jose Antonio Llano Cifuentes is one of our examples here from 1951. And I should point out your book's tremendous in terms of background in many ways, as I mentioned previously. And I can't get away without saying high praise for the Onanue Institute, originally known as the Puerto Rican Institute when it was founded in 1974. A lot of the details and a lot of research efforts on their part in terms of really highlighting the student experience here at Seton Hall for our Latino community, and also faculty, administrators, and guests and friends of the community. And again, thanks to Ms. Anna Campoverde for her great work in terms of being a wonderful colleague as well. Additional resources, this will go real quick, and I'm going to turn it over to my wonderful colleagues. Okay, and I'm glad this is being recorded because this is the really text-heavy part. Finding aids, encyclopedias, almanacs, dictionaries, search engines, citation, print sources. One thing I do want to point out, just different print sources, newspapers of old, newspapers that are present day. If you can get indexes, really key. And this part here, bibliographies, footnotes, endnotes. I can't stress this enough, especially in terms of traditional print books. If you find these areas, you can find a whole new list of maybe potential places to go and find different resources that might be more obscure and so forth. My colleague Lisa, Professor DeLuca, does great work with Hein Online, and there's also Hathy Trust and other types of engines if you're going more specific. And this is something I'm glad to work with her and everybody else on in terms of collaboration, in terms of finding materials that are more obscure, along with those that are more commonplace. So that mentioned alternative sources, which are kind of commonplace nowadays, photographs, film, social media, and so forth. Educational resources, or as they call it in the genealogy biz, alumni records. Mentioned most of them. Catalogs, student handbooks I didn't really put in here because it was more about activity instead of documentation of individual students, but these are really interesting and really important. As you can see, newspapers, yearbooks, attendance registers, as we saw a little bit about, cash books, punishments, and so forth. The cash books are financials. Syllabi where available, of course, determining on if the faculty want to share that with the ages and our collection, departmental, registrar, and so forth, but also keeping in mind the respectfulness of the individual, the institution, and what's available to our research community. And notebooks really key in terms of what students were writing, thinking, and learning. And of course, the genealogical approach, you go contextual, civil records, business records, military records, and so forth. So these are just some things, along with the shared experiences of different things and rituals and so forth, that you can look at in terms of making the story more complete as you go along. Data in all its fine forms. And that's me, and I'm going to turn it over to, I think, Jean's next. So thanks for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions in a few moments. And I'm just going to take me out of here. Good. Okay, all you, Jean.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you.
So, I'm hearing a weird echo. Are you guys hearing that? Okay, it's gone. So, give me one moment. Okay, so thank you everybody for coming. I'm Jean Brasili. I'm the gallery director here at Seton Hall University, and I'd like to speak to you about using art and artifacts as tools for data visualization, or my subtitle is Adding a Humanities Component to Data. So here's sort of how data works in the eyes of an artist or curator. Basically, they can understand and enhance our understanding of data because they can impart a humanities context. So by pairing objects with data, they can tell us numerous stories because there's a mutable nature to objects. They can tell us many things, not just one story. And the possibilities are really endless for the way we integrate objects into these data sets, and really limited only by our imagination. Sorry, let's do that again. There we go. So basically, objects can illuminate data in a way that is not possible just by looking at the numbers. And data can do objects can do things. You know, only 5% of people remember numbers and statistics, but 63% of people can remember a story, and a story that's accompanied by these objects that pushes the story the data tells forward. And studies have shown that this data is more persuasive than hard data by itself. They can really help us build objects' emotional relationships with data. And so it offers a more holistic understanding of some of the issues that might be at stake through an interdisciplinary framework that's inherently interdisciplinary. And we'll see that in just a moment. So objects can provide additional entry points for learning beyond the data. And if you look at this chart by Howard Gardner from his groundbreaking book, Frame of Mind, it addresses the different types of learning. So objects can help us visualize things spatially and understand data in a 3D context, maybe in a gallery, or they can help us understand data in a linguistic sense, maybe by speaking or writing about data sets through the lens of these objects. Or maybe you have a personal relationship with the object that helps you with an entry point into the data. Or maybe you have an empathetic view of the data, not from your own experience, but maybe you understand it from another person's experience. So these are all ways that data can be enhanced by the use of objects. So let's talk about some of the objects that maybe are available for use in your data projects, in your data visualization projects. We have the Museum of Anthropology and Archaeology, which includes Native American, Asian, African, South American, and Norse artifacts, among others. We also have a large collection of Asian artifacts. And we also have a lot of Greco-Roman artifacts, as well as Etruscan and Byzantine artifacts. But that's not the full scope of our collections by any means. Those are just some of the highlights. We have a large number of figurative and landscape paintings. We have portraiture photography, Renaissance etchings. We have liturgical objects, sculptures, and so many things. This is an example of a pot from South America. The Chimu culture preceded the Inca culture. So that's a way that you can maybe enhance statistics related to perhaps Spanish conquest of South America, or colonialism, or the rise and fall of cultures. And it could be illuminated by sharing images of the objects with the data sets. I'd also like to talk about the tools that we can use. A lot of our objects are in the Google Arts and Culture platform, and the URL is at the bottom of this slide. And it's easiest to just find the Walsh Gallery if you go to this URL, and then at the top in the search box right here, just type in Walsh Gallery, and it will come right up. It's a little bit unwieldy to give you the full URL. So this is the landing page. I'm not going to go there directly in the interest of time and technology, but check that out. These are 4 pre-curated exhibitions. We'll be adding more content soon. You can look at our ceramics, a sampling of those from around the world, or some of those Greco-Roman artifacts in these 2 coin exhibits, or Native American basketry in this 4th example here. And then these are some of the individual objects that populate those exhibits. Here you'll see we have 141 objects, but believe me, we have tens of thousands of objects. These are just 141 pieces that are on display in the Google Arts and Culture shell. And what's nice about this tool is it shows you everything. It's like a vertical layout, so it goes left to right as you scroll through it. You can organize the data or the objects and locate them by these search tools or sort tools. This is the popularity tool, and I'll be getting back to that in just a moment. I want to show you an individual object record. So if I click on this pot right here, it brings you to an individual record, and you'll have to imagine, I'm showing this in a horizontal format. Imagine I'm scrolling down on a web page which is vertical. So this is the bottom of the web page, and it gives you a little bit of a narrative about the object with some details that you can glean from it. And if you have more questions, my contact information is at the beginning and end of my presentation. Feel free to get in touch and we can drill down on some of the specifics you might need about these objects. So let's going back to those tools. So first we looked at popularity. This is another sort tool. You can nail things down chronologically by date. So we're looking at a bunch of objects created in like the first, like from the first millennium to the year, the 20th century. And then the third way you can sort data is a little more fun by color. So here are some more of our objects, and I chose red because it's kind of colorful. It showed some really cool things. And it's a mix of everything: material culture, art objects, paintings, and some of the material culture we've got. You can also use other tools. You can create your own gallery. And this is not limited to art collections. You can search across other institutions. So you could include objects from Yale or the Met Museum or the Ashmolean. You can even favorite some of your objects and keep them for future reference and curate our objects with others' objects, or just look at individual objects. It does both. And then there are also some tools here on this sidebar. You can click right here on a little hamburger and it gives you this sidebar. And this is a fun place to explore. There are experiments. People made musical compositions based on data derived from images. You can look at art movements, historical events, historical figures. Have fun with it. Just play around. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to wrap it up, but I want to show you what the possibilities of data are. I'm going to play this and talk over it. This is a data set created by an artist named Alinta Crouch. She has a background as a field researcher, an artist, and an archivist. And this is data that was derived, 3 data sets. The depth of a body of water that she was researching, along with a second graph for its temperature and a third one for the tides. She had a 4th data set about the location of tributaries that added a musical component. But this is the data over time. So these are the graphs moving and weaving in and out one another over a period, a defined period. And it literally brings the river to life. You can see it moving as a body of water in and out. So these are some of the potentials of things we can do with data. And I'm going to wrap it up because Sarah still has to speak, but there are so many more possibilities, and I am here to facilitate whatever you envision. I would love to work with you. I'm here to collaborate. That's my role at the gallery. My information is here at the bottom of the slide. Please feel free to get in touch and let's just brainstorm about what we can do together, or feel free to use these tools on your own with your students in class. They're here for that purpose. So thank you. And sorry for the quick pace, but we're trying to keep to a timeline here. I'll hand it over to Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, I'll just bring up my presentation right here. So I'll go very quickly, but I just wanted to introduce you guys to this platform that has the potential to bring everything that Alan and Jean talked about into conversation with one another. And that's our new digital mapping platform. So you can see the URL here. And this was created actually this spring by our technical services archivist, Sheridan Sales, when we were all remote and we were searching for a way to recreate the experience of being on campus. So we started with this project of a tour of Seton Hall, introducing people to the historic buildings. And since we've been able to come back to campus, we've been able to add in artworks as well, which I'll show you. It's built on an open source mapping software that combines with another open source digital exhibit software to create this ability to bring together archival sources and artworks on the basis of location, sort of reuniting the original context of these objects and allowing them to be seen for the first time. And it has a special relevance in terms of the projects that Alan and Jean talked about in terms of starting to bring to life some of the diversity that was here at Seton Hall in the early years of the institution. So this is how it works, more or less. There's a lot more to say about it, and I don't think I'll be able to get to it in the 2 minutes we have remaining, but it identifies the site based on a geolocation, such as Stafford Hall, and then we can bring in all kinds of primary sources. So in this case, it's an image of Monsignor John Stafford, who's the namesake of the building. So this portrait hangs in President's Hall. It was photographed by the gallery, and we're able to bring it here in conversation with the building that was named for him to recreate this original relationship that people may not be aware of today. But it's very flexible. It's not limited to only text or only images like a blog. It can also include videos, it can include recordings. There's a way for people to contribute their own reflections and annotations to the materials that are posted. So really the potential of this platform is really exciting. And so for next year, we hope to build on the work that's been done that you've seen here today. Collecting the data that Alan brought together about the early students at Seton Hall from locations, especially in South America, and organize it by location. So we'll be able to show the relationship of how these students made it to Seton Hall from all these different locations, and then add museum objects, such as the ones that Jean showed, from the countries of origin to show a little bit more about the material culture of the places that they came from, so that there's a bit more rich awareness of what these students must have experienced, you know, the difference between all their different places of origin and all ending up here at the same place as Seton Hall, where we are too. So we hope to highlight some of the amazing descriptions of individuals that Alan found. I was especially excited to see his data about where they ended up, that many of them ended up moving either back home or staying in America, and just their stories, like how being at Seton Hall changed their lives. And we hope that this exhibit, which we'll work on over the next year, will be a really tangible and visible demonstration of the diversity that's always been a part of our community. So I won't belabor the point too much, but I just wanted to end with mentioning that, as Alan was talking about, there are gaps in the data that we have. So it's so important that records of our community end up in the archives so that future generations can learn from them. Like Alan was mentioning, the importance of the student catalogs, the university catalogs, and we know are discussions now about changing the format of those catalogs, you know, moving away from a print format, which makes total sense in today's day and age, and going to a more digital format. But we want to make sure that that information is available so that it can be of benefit to future generations of researchers. So thank you very much to my colleagues. Sorry we went a little over time, and thank you so much for coming.
That was great. Sarah, Alan, and Jean, thank you so much. Sorry for being that person and getting ahead. But
Yeah, thanks, Lisa.
You guys are going to mute me next time.
Not at all.
But it's really exciting. And I think that, you know, we can definitely, it's going to be exciting to work with Anna on this and get her feedback. And it's a great tool for the university to have. So does anybody have any questions before we conclude? Again, Anna, thank you so much for coming. Dr. Escobar, we're so glad that you were here.
Thank you so much. We have to go. We have another meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa, so much. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Take care.